All right, let's dive in. We're going back in time to an era of emperors, cavalry charges, and massive new industries. But this world, this grand, glittering age, was about to come to a screeching, violent halt. We're talking about maybe the single biggest breaking point in all of modern history. So, let me just ask you this. When do you think our modern world really began? You know, the world of globe-spanning conflicts, of industrial-scale warfare. Was it the French Revolution? The Industrial Revolution? Well, the real answer is a whole lot more explosive than that. It all kicked off with a war that raged for 4 years and 3 brutal months, from 1914 to 1918. Before this, war was almost like a gentleman's game, something you'd see in a painting of Napoleon. But after this, it became a global meat grinder. This was the first real world war, sucking in countries from all over the planet.
Now look, trying to figure out why World War I started can feel, well, impossible, right? It's just so complicated, but it really doesn't have to be. To get a handle on the whole chaotic mess, you only need to remember one simple code: 3, 2, 1. And we're going to break down exactly what that means.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll look at this world on the brink of disaster. Then we'll unpack that 3-2-1 code. And after that, we'll walk through the 3 big rivalries and the 2 alliances that basically set the entire planet up for a fight.
So really, what on earth could make the most civilized nations on the planet suddenly turn into red-eyed gamblers, willing to risk everything they had on one catastrophic war? Well, underneath all the fancy diplomacy and royal family drama, there was a cold, hard economic reality driving everything.
It all comes down to something called the law of uneven imperial development. Sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, the Second Industrial Revolution completely changed the game. You had these new industrial powerhouses, especially Germany, just exploding onto the scene, while the old empires like Britain and France were kind of coasting. And when a country's industry grows that fast, it gets a desperate hunger for 2 things: raw materials for its factories and new markets to sell its stuff.
And that brings us right back to our code. This 3-2-1 thing, it is the key to unlocking this whole complicated story. It just cuts right through all the noise and gives us a simple way to see how all the pieces fit together.
So here it is. It's this simple. 3 huge rivalries that just could not be solved peacefully. 2 massive, locked-in military alliances that split Europe in half. And it all came down to one single trigger that would light the fuse. Now, in this explainer, we're going to tackle those 3 rivalries and the 2 alliances. That trigger? Well, that's a story for part 2. Okay, let's get into that first major rivalry. And this one is all about money and power. See, when Germany finally united and became this industrial giant, it looked around the globe for its slice of the colonial pie and ran into a huge problem. The pie was already gone.
I mean, just look at these numbers. The world had already been claimed. The British Empire controlled a mind-boggling 33.5 million square kilometers of territory. That's a quarter of the entire planet. France owned huge chunks of Africa. Russia stretched from Europe all the way to the Pacific. The old empires had already grabbed all the good stuff.
But, and this is the crucial part, by 1913, Germany's economy was on fire. Just look at its steel production, the backbone of any industrial nation. It was pumping out way more steel than Great Britain, the so-called workshop of the world. So you have this situation where Germany has the economic muscle of a world champion, but it's being shut out of the main event. They had the factories, but they had nowhere to sell their goods.
And they were not shy about how they felt. The German foreign minister stood up and basically declared, hey, the days of Germany just letting other countries have the world, those days are over. We demand our place in the sun. And let me tell you, that wasn't just some politician's speech. That was a direct challenge. Germany was ready to fight for its share.
So this intense economic pressure, this frustration, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was like pouring gasoline on old fires that were already smoldering all across Europe. Which brings us to our first 2 major deadlocks, the old feuds that were about to become a whole lot more dangerous.
First up, the grudge match. France versus Germany. And this one was deeply personal. I mean, the German Empire was literally born by humiliating France back in 1871. Germany didn't just beat them. They captured their emperor, they seized 2 of their richest provinces, and it hit them with a massive fine. For France, this was just unforgivable. Their entire national mission became about one thing: revanche, revenge. They were burning to get their status back as the top power in Europe.
Okay, the second big deadlock was brewing down in southeastern Europe, in a place everyone called Europe's powder keg, the Balkans. Over here, you had the old, decaying Austro-Hungarian Empire squaring off against a very ambitious Russian Empire. Austria-Hungary was trying to push south, grabbing up territory. But Russia saw itself as the big brother, the great protector of the Slavs, especially for new countries like Serbia. So it was this intense struggle for influence, and the whole situation was just incredibly explosive.
So, if the first rivalry was about controlling Europe, and the second was for the Balkans, this third and final deadlock, this was for control of the whole planet. This was the heavyweight title fight, the reigning world champion against the hungry new challenger.
Now, to really get why Germany's next move was so incredibly provocative, you have to understand what a navy meant back then. It wasn't just about ships and guns. A powerful navy was the ultimate status symbol. It was like a giant floating billboard that screamed to the world about your industrial strength, your technology, your global ambition. A massive navy was basically the 20th century version of a king's crown.
And just to give you an idea of the insane amount of money we're talking about, think about this. The cost to build just one of these top-tier battleships was enough to pay for and equip 4 entire army divisions. 4! This wasn't just a military expense, it was an all-in bet on national greatness.
So can you imagine what happened when Germany, who already had the most powerful army in the world, decided it was going to challenge Great Britain on the seas? Well, Britain's response was swift and absolute. Their official policy was simple. For every single battleship they build, we will build 2. This was a race Britain simply could not afford to lose. For an island empire, controlling the seas wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. And this is where all those threads finally come together. You have these 3 huge overlapping rivalries: Germany versus Britain for the world, Germany versus France for Europe, and Russia versus Austria-Hungary for the Balkans. The tension got so high that it literally forced every major power in Europe to pick a side. There was no more staying neutral. The continent split into 2 massive, heavily armed camps.
So, first you get the Triple Alliance. This was basically Germany and Austria-Hungary making a pact, with Italy kind of tagging along as let's say, a less than reliable partner. Their whole goal was to create this solid bloc in the middle of Europe to defend themselves against France in the west and Russia in the east. And in response to that, something pretty incredible happened. 3 countries that had been enemies for centuries were suddenly pushed together by one thing: a shared fear of Germany. Great Britain, France, and Russia formed the Triple Entente. I mean, think about it. Britain and France were historic rivals. Britain and Russia had been playing a global chess match for decades. But their fear of this powerful, unpredictable Germany was so strong that they agreed to bury all that history and team up. And so there you have it. By 1914, the board is set. The players are all in position. You have 3 deep, bitter rivalries that have hardened into 2 giant military alliances, staring each other down. The script has been written, and the gears of war are slowly but surely beginning to turn. The whole of Europe is now a giant powder keg, just sitting there waiting for a spark. So, what happens when someone finally lights a match in a small city in the Balkans called Sarajevo? Well, that's the last piece of our 3-2-1 puzzle. But before we get to that, I'm curious. Out of those 3 big rivalries, the naval race, the France-Germany grudge, or the Balkan struggle, which one do you think was the most dangerous? Drop a comment below and let me know. We'll see what happens when that match gets lit in part 2. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss it. See you next time.